Hey guys, GWS here. Really quickly, I'm going to go ahead and take this test. I might have taken it once before on this channel, but I'm going to take it again just to prove to a certain group of individuals that yes, I am fairly close to center. Now, to preface this, I'm not going to click on my Discord, but it's basically I vary a little bit between like 1 and 2 points to the right or 1 and 2 points. I think I've had like 3 points to the right before, so this could vary. I don't know. It just depends on, because agree and strongly agree, disagree and strongly disagree. It's like I kind of have my own metric for answering those, but even then, it's always going to be a little bit different. So let's go ahead and dig into these questions, and I'll tell you what I think and why. Okay, if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. Um, See, I don't like the wording of the question because it should just serve like whatever direction the people want to go. That's the point of freedom. Like, I don't think you have to have a government deciding who gets the benefit. Picking the winners and losers is a horrible thing. But given that fact, if you want to talk about specific things like tariff stuff that you need governments to control, obviously you want it to serve humanity. So I'm going to agree. And basically, the way I do this is if I agree with something but have some dissenting views on it, I'll do agree. Strongly agree generally means I either feel super strongly about it, obviously, or I pretty much just plainly agree, like no caveats. And same thing for disagreeing. Okay, so second question. I'd always support my country whether it is right or wrong. I always get torn on the patriotism thing. It's There's an argument to be made for patriotism. You want to be thankful for where you're born, and it doesn't mean proud of your country, but I'd say generally you want to support your country. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. Um, yeah, I'm gonna agree in general. I mean, you don't want to be like blindly patriotic, as I was saying above, but in general, yeah, obviously, you don't want too much patriotism. So it's like, you agree, but it's with some balance. Our race has many superior qualities, not touching it. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Begrudgingly, I kind of agree with that. Just because, like, if you're trying to get something done, um, and someone's trying to prevent you, like, if you have, like, somebody you're rivaling with or even that you hate, but that can otherwise get some good outcome or, whatever, um, against this obstacle, then yeah, I'm more, and the way I think of stuff like this too is like I believe in pragmatism. I believe in results. I believe in getting things done. I believe that like the means to which you get things done like can be flexible. I don't agree with the ends justify the means, but I agree that you could be a little bit flexible with the means. It doesn't mean you completely compromise your morality, but in general, like if you can get the good outcome by and minimize damage. If there's a little bit of damage that has to be done, then it just has to be done. A military action that defies international law is sometimes justified, almost always not. But, there is the little bit of a caveat that there are situations where you will be forced to go to war where the international community does not agree. And, these are things that you gotta weigh. For example, the Iraq War, we had no business doing that. The UN voted this war down. Like 1441 nothing. we voted against the UN voted against the war. That was that. And so when you have the international community against something, you have to ask, um, is this issue important enough to fight a war where we are going to weaken our international bodies? It's like the UN is a joke right now. Bill Clinton did a good job with the UN. It was one of the great parts of his presidency. The UN had more respectability under Bill Clinton than under any president, and that was a good thing. Bill Clinton empowered the UN, used its assistance, peacekeeping powers in places like the Balkans. So, um, you want a strong international body, but then again, like I said, there will be times you have to defy that body, especially if you are a stronger country with a lot of interests and stuff. Okay, so there is now a worrying fusion between information and entertainment. Yes, and the big reason is like entertainment just spins information way out of hand. Like you got your Jimmy Kimmels and your Jimmy Fallons and your, like one guy in the UK, I can't remember his name. You got all these late night, you have all these comedians, and then you have the pundits who will spin stuff to the left or right. You got Breitbart, Fox News, and you got CNN, MSNBC, all that. Like it's all punditry, and the pundits are there to be entertaining. Like that's half their job. It's not like a nuanced thing. So the level of discourse um, in this country is at its lowest point it's probably ever been in its history. And I'm not just talking about people fighting. Like, we've had periods of high conflict and low conflict in this country. But the point is, I want all of you who are skeptical of this answer to go look at JFK versus Richard Nixon in 1960. Probably the best series of debates in history between two very knowledgeable, very politically astute, very qualified people. Not talking over each other, not trying to throw one line zingers at the crowd. They were pulling statistics, and it was a more educated time, and this is what we want to get back to. So, absolutely, there's a problem. Okay, next page. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. It's questions like this that just um, it depends. I would say probably, I probably go both ways on this one from one time to another, but I mean, there's probably a lot more differences in nationalities than there are the social economic classes. So I'd say disagree, but it's like I said, it's not a very meaningful question because which nationalities, which classes, which people? It's just the question isn't very meaningful. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. Again, another one of these questions. You obviously want to control both. Um, I think it's basically saying what the question is mainly trying to ask is labor more important than currency? And I would say no. Um, and really, like, inflation is not in itself a bad thing. All inflation, you know, the main thing inflation does is it'll hurt the credit rating of the country and it discourages saving. You want to curb inflation to a point, but inflation is what encourages spending and discourages saving. You know, like you generally want to encourage movement of money, monetary velocity, but that ends at a certain point because then you get stuff like speculation and then you get economic crashes and then just general instability. So you do want to control some inflation, but I'd say ultimately the production side of things is more important. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Yeah, yeah, in general, they do. Um, you can have too many regulations, and I'd say I'd more. It's kind of between agree and strongly. I'm gonna still just generally agree because there's certain environmental regulations that are put in place that just go way out of hand, and you can have serious problems. So just agree with caveats on that one. From each according, nope, not going there. From each according to his ability, each according to his need. Now go to Venezuela for that shit. Anyhow, it's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now bottle branded consumer product. I generally agree, especially after you figure out that what they're bottling is pretty much filtered tap water, which is kind of ridiculous. And in general, I think that I'm a free market person. I love freedom of contract and all that, but the basic thing is with stuff like water and all that, um, it's what defines ownership and what the government protects as ownership. And I think it goes way overboard. There's a million things we can talk about. Like land ownership, I kind of am split on. I I like the Native American aspect that land is to be used, not owned. When you vacate your land, you don't, I don't know if you should really have the right to that land. Because, especially if you look at some of the statistics of homelessness, like hundreds of thousands of homeless people, yet hundreds of thousands of unfilled homes. Like, you have these real estate companies, they put a sign up in their yard and say, yeah, we're using this property. Don't auction it off. We're using it. And it's just a bunch of nonsense. Like, to what degree we protect ownership and we dish out the rights of ownership. But, being a free market, it's just, I don't know. I think you could still be free market and not have to declare so much stuff beyond. It doesn't have much to do with that question, but it kind of goes into that territory, if you will. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Well, that was just the next question. I'm gonna agree with that. Um, I'm gonna strongly agree with that, just because it's just like, I mean, it's there for what it is, but like, should it be bought and sold? That's the question. And I think it's something. I don't know if I usually strongly agree with that, but on this one, I'm going just because, like, there's nothing really against it. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Um, yeah, kind of. I mean, currency manipulation is just the result of currency existing. I'm not a big like financial manipulation, all that. I don't think it really adds. That being said, I don't think it's something that needs to be regulated. We should remove financial regulations, but it is kind of this nasty little negative side effect of capitalism when, like, you have just people manipulating currency, buying euros and selling US dollars to buy your euros and waiting for the relative values to change, all that. I've never been too much of a fan of. In general, like stock trading, share trading, not even so much of a big fan of that as a principle. Um, Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade, yes, 100%. Because, here's the thing. I've been having free trade debates on this particular Discord server for a while. Um, and, like, the general arguments for it, like, they never address the fact of the distribution of resources. For one thing, like in trade, yes, trade always produces positive economic outcomes as a whole. And the more trade, the more positive the outcome. I concede to that basic fact. But in this, there's two things that the free traders will never concede to, and the data simply proves them wrong on this. Number one, just because the overall advantage is with trade does not mean both nations benefit equally. It does not even guarantee that both nations benefit. Number two, the nations that benefit from free trade, what kinds of industry are benefited? Those that can trade internationally and take advantage of, for example, in the United States, like we have regulations, we have unions, we have labor laws, we have all these things put in place that other nations simply do not have. Like in terms of salary, benefits, all that, you're talking about $40 to $60 an hour for a unionized worker in the United States. Um, for a place like China, like their average monthly earnings is $500 a month. And they're probably a lot higher than places like Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, all that. And so you got to ask yourself, like, um, when you're dealing with free trade, who can take advantage of that cheaper labor? The multinational corporations. Um, and who loses out based on that? The parts manufacturers in the United States who cannot compete. They simply cannot compete. They can't, like you look at the supply chain. The supply chain's always going to take the path of least resistance, right? It's always going to take, everything follows the lowest price, um, price per unit quality, and there's trade-offs there too. But in general, like, um, China, like if you get, say, um, you know, a horrible product, all this stuff made out of particle board that they're shipping over here, um, that you see at Lowe's, Home Depot, for example, all, just these disassembled, pretty much freaking slabs of particle boards. Say, put this together. Here's your entertainment center, or here's your desk, or whatever they're trying to sell. It's horrible craftsmanship. Tons and tons of defects, but it's worth it because, like, they're paying like a tenth of the price that they'd have to pay for people in the United States, and they're going to work longer. You're going to get, instead of like 35 hours a week with 90-minute breaks and lunches and all this stuff you get with unions, they're going to get people working 12 hours a day, very few breaks, very few worker protections, and they can't even commit suicide because you put nets up. But anyhow, that's pretty much my position on that. The only social responsibility a company should the only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Um, I mean, I don't know. See, a lot of these questions too. I always run into this when I do this. I guess the spectrum is okay for determining some things, but a lot of the questions are kind of like, okay, well, let's just assume they're dealing with companies with shareholders first. Like, let's just talk about Walmart. Um, like, at a minimum, I think a company hiring somebody full time needs to pay somebody like the flat minimum to survive. Like, the one thing I don't like about the situation with Walmart is, like, um, they are subsidized by the government through welfare programs. And it's not just Walmart, it's Amazon, it's a lot of companies too. But a lot of these companies are subsidized just for just because they pay minimum wage. Minimum wage does have to increase, but in general, I tend to believe in things from the like minimum standard standpoint. By minimum standard, I'm not talking about like a certain wage, because minimum wage as a principle is not a very good system, but it's what we have, and it has to increase. But in general, you want to move over to a system that enforces certain quality. Like, you got to be able to afford to, for example, take care of your dependents, pay your rent, pay your light bill, pay for food. And, I'm talking about like reasonable numbers. Like, they shouldn't have to pay you so that you pay $2,000 for a house a month or something like that. No, like just something, hold companies to minimum standards. But in general, companies need to meet the bare minimum at least, because otherwise the government has to come in, and that's what we do not want. The rich are too highly taxed. I can kind of go either way with this. I think it's kind of right where it needs to be. Like, I think between 35 and 40% is a healthy income tax for the wealthy. In general, I think the impact of income taxes is overrated, because you have like these countervailing effects of income tax. Like, for example, income tax, on one hand, it decreases the desire to consume, but on the other hand, it also decreases the incentive for high salaries. Like, for example, you're a CEO of a company. Like, if the top marginal rate, for example, were 90%, you're more likely, and board members are more likely to say, Uncle Sam's taking this money anyhow. Why don't we put this into our company where we're only going to get charged 50%? Like, why are we going to pay a CEO $3 million a year when almost all of that, up to like the higher margins, is going to be gone? So in general, no, I don't think the rates. I think it's kind of where it needs to be. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. I don't like the word should, but in general, you should get more if you pay more. Um, that's that's just a reality. Like, if you make more money, you get more stuff. I don't really. That being said, like, you gotta treat people who are sick. Like, if somebody has cancer and they go to a hospital, like, that hospital needs to treat them. If somebody needs insulin because they're a diabetic, that person needs to get insulin. Like, there's no, um, you know, there's certain things, like, they talk about with healthcare, liberals will bring up elasticity a lot, demand elasticity, where you have the right to refuse to get a service. And um, there's a lot of things in healthcare where that's overrated on, and it's really, really nuanced, and it just depends on what you're talking about with healthcare. That's one of the things I often ask. Like, with healthcare, you say you want free healthcare. What are you talking about? Are you talking about going to the doctor because you broke a nail or something, or are you talking about cancer? Because if you're talking about cancer, yeah, they any place that has cancer treatment has to treat people who come in. You can't just refuse people. Period. Um, that being said, um, on the back end of it, when it comes time to bill, yeah, they have a right to bill you, and you need to pay what you can for that service. Period. It's like, you need to pay. And that doesn't mean everybody can pay. Of course not. Like, there's going to be medical bankruptcies, going to be all that stuff. But the reality is, like, they have a right to pursue people for compensation. Because people should pay for what they use. It's only fair. Like, I don't believe in this, like, everybody pays equally regardless of what they use. That's not the way things are. Like, you are an individual, you are a human being. Um, your services are not free. Like, these doctors, they have to give you a bed, they have to give you a machine, they have to, do what it takes to care for you. And they have a right to seek compensation from you. Um, and so, okay, government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Agree. Um, I, I, that kind of brings up something too. I like regulation most when it comes with the information aspect. Like, for example, the regulations and price transparency that Trump just signed and are going to be implemented soon. I think the 1st of June, 1st of July. Those are good regulations because ultimately you want transparency, you want people to have the information that they need to have to make an informed decision. And you're not always going to get that from a company. Like, the government needs to mandate that companies provide the necessary information that people need in that regard. And see, I believe in that with GMOs. Like, basically anything people are concerned about, any kind of thing that people ought to know, just mandate companies, let them know. It's just simple as that. A general free market requires restriction on the ability for predator multinationals to create monopolies. In general, I agree, but it's like I said, it's nuanced. I don't believe in the mother may I type of attitude. Like, for example, Time Warner merging with whoever they just merged with, I forgot. Um, some I don't know, but like, say you talk about like back in the day, the AOL Time Warner merger. Like, wow, was a big thing in the early 2000s. Like, it should not be a mother may I thing. Like, they should just, if they want to merge, they should not have to ask the government. Um, I think that'd be like the SEC that control that, um, something like that. But they should be able to just do it. And the way you deal with monopolies is simple. You create a very clear test for what constitutes a monopoly, very clear, and make it with multiple um, testing criteria, like not just share amount in a particular business sector, but it needs to be based on, does this company's existence, um, like, is this company so large or so influential or so powerful that um, its decisions could harm the structure of the country as a whole, especially the government. You know, like AT&T back in the day. AT&T price gouged the hell out of people with long distance and curbed innovation pretty much for decades. Like, with phone technology, we're behind decades because of AT&T. When the government broke that up, that was a very, very good thing because that's when you had technology accelerating, you had competition forced, which was a good thing. The freer the market, the freer the people. By definition, that is kind of true. Um, you talk about positive and negative freedoms, but I've always believed like freedom is when somebody tries to get in your way of doing what you want to do. I don't believe freedom. I don't believe in positive freedom. Like, freedom is the government enables you to buy a house. That's not freedom. That's just, like, freedom is no obstacles. You are free to move around in the economy. Um, Abortion when a woman's life is not threatened should always be illegal. Absolutely. Um, I don't think I need to go that, I can do the full abortion thing. I just don't feel like doing it right now. I've had a few of those debates in the past few days. All authority should be questioned. Um, Questioned but respected, so I'll generally agree. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. I don't necessarily agree with that point of justice. Let's see. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Absolutely. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. I don't know. Um, like, you got to go to class if you're going to school. Like, otherwise, what's the point? And we have public schools for a reason. It's not to educate kids, although that helps. It was a protection against child labor in the 1930s that we had mandatory public education because you had children working in the factories in the 1920s, and that was wrong, and they did away with it, and that was for the better. All people have their rights, but it's better for all of us with different sorts of people to keep to their own kind. Nope. That being said, let me make sure I'm still running. I am still running because I don't want to have to redo this. Good parents sometimes speak to children. I agree. You could go way overboard with it, and studies show that a lot of parents do go way overboard with it, and they afflict severe psychological harm. But in terms of spanking, I agree with it because there's no other. You know, I think with spanking, you got to kind of look at it like this. Each person's an individual. Each person needs to be treated differently. In general, like spanking's a negative thing. Like punishment has a negative impact. But then again, so does negative reinforcement. So what you got to ask yourself is, as a parent, like if you want to talk about it from a min-max standpoint, is like, is the punishment going to allow you to use a lot more positive reinforcement in the future? Because like children, you know, at least when I was growing up, and still kind of today, because I have nieces and nephews, um, like punishment will work one time, but when it works, it really works. Um, but you always got to be careful that you're doing it for the right reasons, that you're not causing your children to dislike being around you. Like when it gets to that point, when they start becoming afraid of everything, that's when you get the psychological harm associated with physical punishment. It is natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. I don't know if this has to do with anything. I always answer either slightly agree, slightly disagree. But yeah, of course, parents are going to keep. I don't know what kind of question that is. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Absolutely. Absolutely should not be a criminal offense. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future to find jobs. Yeah, like I don't see a problem with that. Um, like education really, that's the whole point. You're trying to prepare people for the workplace after school, or that's at least one function. Like if you're going to keep kids in school instead of having them, participate in child labor, you generally like want to at least give them something functional, and I'm more for that. People serious, no, not going there. You know, all life is beautiful. That's the way I kind of view that. It's just like no, if somebody wants to have a child, that's the most beautiful thing, and you know, we should be praising and encouraging anybody who wants to take that step in their lives. The most important thing for the children is to learn to accept discipline. Not the most important, but it's important. Um, there are no savages. There's only different cultures. I mostly agree. I think I agree enough strongly. There's exceptions, but the point is like we all have our demons. We all have our problems. All cultures, Middle East, European, American, Asian, everybody has their crimes that they've committed. Um, those who are able to work in refusing accident should not accept society's support. Um, I disagree with that. Like, see, my thing is like, I think we benefit if we provide the bare minimum, even to people who don't deserve it. Because basically, here's the thing: is if you just guarantee people a home, um, food, like, and guarantee that they're not going to be kicked out of their place, and maybe a few dollars for like a UBI, um, that is perfectly. The big thing is like, are they better in the home or are they better in the streets? Um, and it actually costs more to leave them on the streets. It costs more, creates social unrest, creates these unpleasant situations where you have people camping in tents in front of like these hotels or these corporate headquarters, all that. Um, or you get a lot of them in Vegas too. I've been to Vegas a few times, and like you'll see people just on the side of the road. It's like these people need to be guaranteed stuff. Like, it doesn't matter if they're doing drugs or whatever. Like, if you provide them with that minimum, it just reduces the strain on society. You know, at the cost of something that maybe isn't morally the best. Because I mean, like on a moral level, I see what people are saying. Like, if you don't want to put forth anything, well, hell with you then. And I see that, and like on an emotional level, that's true, but just on a factual basis, when you compare the costs of stuff, um, it's better to give people the minimum, regardless. When you're troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. I kind of I agree with looking at the bright side of life on stuff. So yeah, there's that. First generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their own new country. Probably true. Um, what's good for most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Not necessarily. But again, it depends what you're talking about. No broadcasting institute, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Yes. I do not believe in government funded media at all. That is a private thing, period. No BBC, no PBS, none of that. It's just ridiculous. Um, okay, page 4 of 6. Oh boy, I've been going on. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism? Yes, definitely. A significant advantage of a one party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress. No, I wouldn't call that an advantage because gridlock is its own advantage. It prevents there from being too many laws. Um, Gridlock is built into our system. That's the whole point. Gridlock is essential to a democratic style system that respects a minority input, and that minority input is important. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Nope. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. No. I used to be for the death penalty, but I switched with all the lethal injection botches, and just after seeing and hearing about just some of the sickening stuff that's happened with lethal injections. I would agree with a firing squad, but I think only one state has firing squad left, and just in general, society can't stomach it. And plus, we can't get on with the process of putting people to death. They stay on death row for their lives, so it's like, why are we paying all these legal fees for death row, like a fortune, like thousands and thousands of dollars to hold all these cases, um, when we could just do something as simple as just say life in prison. You're here for life. You're with the other prisoners. You don't got to worry about trials, but you're not getting out of prison. Period. No parole, any of that. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. Um, I'd say it's just always the way it's going to be. Like hierarchies are natural. They're natural based on segments of control people have, and you can't just eliminate that control. Like people, you're always going to have like differences in ability, differences in contacts. There's just always going to be these things where people can obtain power, and those with the drive to do so will do it. Um, in general, you can have something with no hierarchies if, and this is a big if, you it's a tiny society. Like if you're a farming village or something, yeah, you can have like some kind of anarcho-communist type of system, but in general, it doesn't work out. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Um, Generally, I agree. It's just abstract art a lot of times just seems a little bit lazy to me. Then again, there is like modernism and postmodernism. Postmodernism is like the whole thing where you're rejecting the old standards, and this is what abstract art is. And then you have postmodernism, which is like a parody of postmodernism. And you got all these, art is pretty nuanced stuff, and a lot of what you see is like inside kind of debates within the art itself. But in general, I just prefer things that look beautiful. That to a normal person, that's all that matters. Like if you're some art major, I can kind of see your point, but that doesn't really apply to most of the population. And that's what this should be based on. And criminal justice punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Not really. Um, you need both. Um, like you don't want to go too far in the rehabilitation aspect because then you're just saying prison is just like, oh, it's like a rehab center that I can't leave. Like, you don't want it to be that. You want prison to be, a bad, rough place to be. But at the same time, you want to reach a hand out to people to say, like, we don't want this for you. We want you to contribute to our society in a positive way. Here's how you do it. We'll prepare you. We'll reach a hand out to you a little bit to prepare you if you're willing to accept it. But like giving out free condoms, doing all this stupid stuff, trying to improve housing conditions and, telling them to turn down the thermostat. It's just, I don't know. But yeah, in general, you want to rehabilitate more than punish. Like, that's the whole point. Unless there's no rehabilitation possible, then it's just, um, you know, here's your place to die or whatever. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. I do agree with that. There's just some people, psychopaths, or just people addicted to crime, people who like don't know anything else and just can't, for whatever reason, that they make up in their heads, they can't get out of the whole crime war that they're in. But yeah, there are times where it's a waste of time. Like the business person and manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Yeah, obviously. I strongly agree with that too. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Um, no, I'll disagree with caveats because gender roles do have a place, but it's like, there's a lot of people, men and women, that don't fall into the traditional gender roles. And it's important that people be given opportunities. and their opportunities to be accommodated and not be spit on by society. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Um, yeah, definitely. Um, I'll even strongly agree with that. That's just a fact. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Yeah, I don't like it, but it's just the reality. Like, you know, like you have to deal with the powers that be before you can overthrow them. Basically, you can't just overthrow the powers that be. And that goes again with my philosophy on pragmatism. Astrology accurately explains many things. No, it does not. Um, you cannot be moral without being religious. Generally, I agree with that. Um, Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Um, Often it is, because charity can come in many forms. Like, yeah, the government can send you a check and all that, and there are guarantees with the government that you don't get with charity. But the fact is, like the churches are providing a huge amount of charity, especially in our inner cities. Um, and that's important. Some people are naturally unlucky, no, because luck doesn't. I don't know. There's something to say about fate, but I agree with some aspect of fate. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Religious values are good. That doesn't mean you got to talk about religion. Like, see, schools should ultimately be there to teach. That's what school is. Like, you're there to learn reading, writing, arithmetic. That's the big three things. A little bit of civics, a little bit of, you know, if you're in the U.S. American history, um, a little bit of basics, like just basic stuff. Like, I think school goes on way too long, but in general, like when you have a school that has a value system, um, yeah, religious values are good. Like, pretty much all moral values are religious to begin with. So that's just the reality. Some people. Okay, so let's go on to six now. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. Not really. I mean, you want to wait to have sex, obviously, but I just don't know about marriage in modern society. That's just a personal thing. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. I agree. Um, because what's the alternative? An orphanage? A single parent household that's going to cause a lot of psychological problems. No, if it's a stable household and it's the best qualified household. Now, granted, you can, like, I think a same-sex couple, like, if you're going to rate it on a point system, the same sex would, like, lower the point, because you want the child to be in an ideal traditional setting as much as possible. But that ideal is just never going to exist. And I think that probably a same sex couple in a very stable home would be better than a single parent, basically, or like a significantly poorer um, family. I guess pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult, of course. Like, you know, you got to be careful, but yeah, I'm just gonna say strongly agree. Well, I don't know. I'm not a fan of pornography personally, so it's like I'm not gonna put strongly, but it's just, yeah. I mean, why would you make that illegal? That's the question. Like, you always gotta ask the question. Why should the government be involved in this? And it should never be. If your answer to that is because I don't like it, then you should probably re-examine your values. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. I agree. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Pretty much agree with that. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. Yes, definitely. Now let's see where I stand. And we stand in this one. I tested center left, which is kind of strange. Yep, but yeah, this is what I said I was going to take, and this is, yeah, I think this is the first time I've actually tested to the left. But the point is that I am very close to center, as I was before. Um, Except for, I think on before, I was like 1 point to the right, 1 or 1.5 or something like that. Um, but, yeah. So there's my test. Um, and thank you guys for listening, and God bless.